Welcome. Today we're going to be doing something slightly different. So a couple of people have been asking for this for a while, and I've seen so much interest from the community as to wanting to get involved with casting. And so I was hoping that maybe something I did could maybe help out a couple more people, kind of introduce you to how to get involved with the scene, what sort of things we think about, how a basic production works. I hope you have a lot of fun here today. And there goes my power. Rule 1 for being a caster in South Africa: get yourself an inverter. Okay, so let's get into this. I get that not every game is the same, not every game is going to have the same sort of points that you need to emphasize, the tempo is going to be slightly different, the dynamic between casters is going to be very different between games, but the basic idea kind of stays the same between them. But what does it mean to actually be a caster? What are we doing when we're casting? The big thing is, we're not just shouting at video games, we're trying to tell a story. We're trying to build some sort of narrative, and that's why I decided to call this the art of the narrative, because the whole point is to build a story. What are we doing? Who are these people? Why is this an important game? The basic rule is, and you've got to keep this in mind at all stages, it's not about you. And that is something that a lot of people get wrong, is they come on and they try and make the show about themselves. They think that they have to entertain the crowd. No one cares about you as a caster. Forget about trying to be funny. You can't be going off on tangents about when you're playing it. If you bring up something you've seen in a pub, that's great. That's fine. If you talked about when you've played with these guys or you've seen them online and what they were doing at that stage, great. If you've interviewed them before, great. You can reference that sort of stuff. But don't spend half the match talking about your personal experiences. And I think another important part of that is it doesn't really matter if you mess up that badly, as long as you're not super embarrassing yourself. It's not a problem. Things happen. You stumble over it, you smile about it, you laugh about it, and you move on. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making is they beat themselves up or they put themselves down on broadcast, where they just talk about how they can't talk English or they're terrible, and they take 30-40 seconds berating themselves. All you're doing at that stage is drawing attention to the mistake you've made. If you just move past it quickly, things happen. No one cares. No one's here to see you. And I mean that in the absolute nicest way. We are here to tell a story. And we tell a story as a team. So if you guys don't really know how a casting crew works, it's made up of typically at least 3 people. You traditionally have at least 2 casters and at least 1 person on production. And your casters are divided between play-by-play and color. Play-by-play is the one who calls all the action as it happens. And then the color caster, otherwise known as the analytical caster, is the guy breaking down all this information. Rocket League is one of the things that this line really becomes blurred. You don't really have a play-by-play or a color caster. You can still sort of fall into those roles, but with the action being so fluid constantly, there's no distinguished breaks. For now it's the time for the play-by-play, and now it's the time for the color caster. The action's going. When something's happening, you gotta call it. And even when you're doing other games like Overwatch or Valorant, there tends to be a little bit more of a break between now we're fighting and now we're just waiting for teams to group up. Even in those cases, though, you might have meshes between the two of them. If a fight starts or a pick-off happens while the color caster is talking, you don't just end your sentence mid-sentence. You got to finish the thought and pass it across at that stage. So these are the general overviews of them, and they differ slightly game by game. So what are we doing? We're trying to build context. Every part of the broadcast, from the moment it goes live to the moment you say goodbye at the end of it, you're trying to build context. What happened before this moment? What is happening right now, and what does that mean for the next 30 seconds, for the next 10 minutes, for the future of this entire tournament or a player's career? I would suggest at least framing your ideas as before, during, and after. If you guys have never been on a broadcast or maybe you've watched a bunch of Twitch shows, this is the basic general structure of it, and it'll help you to understand just some of the terminology that I'm going to be using as we go through it. And so the basic thing is, before the broadcast starts, you typically have a call time. This is half an hour to an hour beforehand. Opening is when you now go live and we say, welcome everyone, it's time for the RLCS. You know, all that really nice dramatic stuff. You then discuss the matches, the games, etc. Go into the game. And then after the game, you're either going to be throwing to a breaks because you're coming back for another series, or maybe you were just doing a single match between 2 teams, a show match or something like that, in which case you're going to be going straight through to the end. And so it's a nice little cycle in the middle that starts repeating itself. And I can tell you, the opening is probably the most terrifying moments of my life. That going live in 5, 4, 3, you keep quiet, you shake slightly, you put on your best fake smile, and you just go for it before the broadcast. So this comes in during your call time or even before your call time. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to prepare? What is happening in the half an hour? First and foremost, get there on time. And when it comes to that, check your time zones. As soon as you start working on international broadcast, you have got to be able to put that thing into Google and be like, okay, what does this actually work out to me? A good idea for that as well, just keep your phone with Discord on you at any stage, because you will typically get pinged if you're not there, if you're missing your call time, and you can arrive 10 minutes late because you messed up time zones, but rather arrive 10 minutes late for an hour call time than 10 minutes before you go live. Chances are they're probably going to have found a replacement for you by that stage. Dress well. This is something that I think a lot of people don't take seriously, but don't just sit there in a t-shirt for a broadcast. I'm not saying you have to be dressed up in a suit and tie, but be presentable, right? This is you that you're representing. This is the tournament that you're representing. Before the tournaments, if you don't know the teams, you don't know the games, it's a good idea to research it. But you should be trying to find out all the information that you can about the games that are busy being played. These days, for some tournaments, it's much easier where we've got stuff like Liquipedia for Overwatch, for Rocket League, for Trackmania. You can go back and you can see all the history of the teams, but that doesn't always happen. You know, if you're doing local tournaments, if you're doing small little school tournaments, try and find the tournament page. Maybe you're casting the semifinals and the finals, but you have no idea what happened in the bracket stage. Just pull it up and have it next to you on a second screen. That's something else. Have 2 screens. That's a non-negotiable. And then always have extra information on that monitor. So previous results, head-to-head matchups, tournament names, pronunciations, social medias of your fellow casters, and even actually post out on your social medias. It's always really good to help you link yourself to brands that you're really proud of casting with. You tell your followers, and it gives your followers a reason to keep track of you. It's part of the whole networking aspect of it. And there's also very little that's more embarrassing than not knowing what this match is even called. So if you're doing the Spring Invitational and you start talking about the Winter RLCS or fumbling your way through that, those are things that should be polished beforehand. Make sure there's not a light behind you. That's bad. That will wash out your cameras. If best possible, try and get yourself a nice clean broadcast. So right now, I've got the best one I can. It's either got to be very clean or something with a bit of character. Green screens are not necessary, but some people do insist on them. It all comes down to the production itself. But even if you're not using a green screen, don't have a messy bedroom behind you. Make your bed. Simple things like that. Okay, before the broadcast, use this time to get to know the people you're working with. You should be trying to figure out who's the play-by-play and the color. Now, typically for big broadcasts, you'll be placed in as a play-by-play or a color caster. But sometimes if you're just doing this casually with friends or something like that, you won't know. And it's a good idea to figure out. Try both of them for a while. And then certainly I would typically say the more experienced one typically takes the color caster role, just because they might have more idea of the game and how the dynamics of the game can shift. Either that, or you have a very experienced caster with a not experienced caster but a very good pro player, in which case you put the pro player on as the color caster, because they can't call the action as it's going. That's a very practiced skill. But you can still at least then throw and set up your pro player, your very experienced player, to be able to weigh in on any situations or ask them questions between the rounds and take the pressure off them. So those are the kind of typical dynamics between it. You also want to know what you've got to work with. Do you have graphics for a bracket? Do you have graphics for the points in a match? Do you have a head-to-head lineup? And you got to know that it's coming. So you can chat about, when I say this, that means we want you to bring up the bracket, because you don't want to, in the broadcast, break that idealistic nature of it, where you start going, now can we please have the bracket? Instead, it should be like an inherent core that you're hinting towards your production that that's what I'm going for. So it's, now if we take a look at today's bracket, we'll see what happened in the build-up to this match. We're here in the upper bracket semifinals, and then chat to your co-caster about anything. Literally anything. That sort of rapport building conversation at the beginning will naturally flow into the conversation while you're casting as well. Maybe you start talking about the teams that you're watching. Maybe you're talking about the current meta, and you'll even be able to spark some conversations or some controversy points that you can bring up in the cast. So this person's got a strong idea about Junkrat as a hero in Overwatch. And so you can then talk about it, and when someone picks Junkrat in the game, you can be like, hey, it's your hero, this is what you've always wanted. So that sort of very casual conversation in the half an hour beforehand is really, really good to just get yourself more relaxed, get your co-caster more relaxed, and work together. One of the things that people don't typically talk about is catching. What catching is when you transition from one scene to another, who's going to be the first one to speak? It doesn't matter who. It really doesn't. Typically, it tends to be the play-by-play because the color is there to fluff everything up and make it look pretty, but it doesn't actually matter. Otherwise, it's normally the more experienced of the two casters. And then you just spend the rest of your time discussing story points, ideas. Maybe you don't know the scene very well, but you partner with someone who does. How is this team doing? Who do I need to watch out for in this lineup? Who's been doing fantastic things? Are there any specific storylines or grudges or matches before that we don't know about? And you can share that sort of information beforehand. All of this stuff comes before you even go live. So don't think it's just a rock up and do it. This has got to be the most important point. When production is talking, shut up. You shut up completely. Be at your computer because they're trying to give you very important information. Maybe there's been a change in fixture and all of what you were talking about doesn't matter anymore. Maybe there's been a delay. Maybe you're being pushed for time and we're like, we need to get going in the next 2 minutes. Everyone, when production says, guys, I need your attention, you keep quiet instantly at that stage. It's really, really important. And what goes with that is don't join into a chat where there's 10 people in there and just start trying to take over. If you are in doubt, keep quiet. All right, what happens when they say going live in 3, 2, 1? You hit your opening. And at this stage, whoever's catching it needs to have themselves prepped. I have seen too many people trying to make it up as you go along. The nerves get to you, you don't know what the tournament is, and you fumble yourself for 30 seconds, and it looks terrible. Practice your intro. And I'm just talking about 2 or 3 lines. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have the Winter Invitational. It is RLCS time here in SSA. I'm Altruism, and joining me here for this is Greybeard. Just a little line like that gets you off to such a good start. And it means that people know where you are, what you're doing, they get themselves in, they get themselves hyped. And so it's really, really nice to be able to just have a basic idea of what you're going to be doing for the first 10 seconds. And that typically just as a strategy, it's just a basic framework. And you guys can make this very much your own. You can be super hyped with this. You can be very professional, whatever. It comes with a greeting. Hello, everyone. Name of tournaments. Welcome to RLCS. This is the Winter Invitational. Introduce yourself and your co-caster. I'm Altruism, and this is Greybeard. And then you kind of keep quiet. Once you've introduced your co-caster, you hand off and give them a chance to talk. There's nothing more awkward as the second caster who's not doing the catch to just sit there for a minute and a half while this person goes off this long tangent and you just sit there going, I exist. After that, after the intro and the nerve-wracking part's done, then we can get into some of the more typical stuff, the discussion, right? And what I like to do, and the way I like to phrase this, is that I like to start broad and zoom in all the way until the action that we're going to be looking at. So, start with what the whole tournament is. Start with what the whole league is. For RLCS, it's a year-long thing trying to get towards the wildcards for us. And so, we start in the grand picture of things. And then you get this weekend, this is what the current standings are like. Brackets currently look like that. Today we're going to be covering the semifinals and the finals, and so then you can zoom in a little bit more. That's today's action, or if you're just doing a single match, that's fine. But make mention as to what it is. What match is that? Unless it's just a show match. And what is the context of that show match? What is today all about? Is the basic idea. And then you get more and more narrow between it. You start talking about the first match once you've gone through the general schedule for the day, and you start talking about these are our 2 teams, these are the players to watch out for, these are the maps that they're picking, or we go into a ban phase or something like that. We have got to see a lot of this character from this team, or this player has been renowned for this, they've got a sub in. All of that sort of little filler, the nuance about this particular matchup comes at this point. And then you can always get baited into predictions. I put an exclamation mark there because predictions are optional. Don't always get baited in. If you don't know these teams, don't get baited into prediction because you've got to back up any prediction that you want. So that's the basic idea of where we start a broadcast. The hard part about this is trying to match it to the time. So this zooming in context, you will typically have the tournament intro, points and brackets, today's action. All of that will go by pretty quickly, and then you need to drag out the first match for the entire length of whatever it is. So you can cut out as much of this as you need to, or save some of this information for when you've got dead air. When you've got dead air, or you've got time to vamp, or there's been a disconnection or a pause or something like that, then you've got to still have some of this information behind you. And that information can come from the research you did before or what you've seen so far in the match. But typically at the beginning, your production will say, we've got 5 minutes to kill before the match starts, or we're trying to push really hard, you've got 30 seconds to get into the field, or you're going to have 15 minutes. And don't be afraid at that stage in the conversation before you go live to talk to your production and say, we don't know these guys. We have no information behind them. Please don't make me sit and try and make up stuff for 15 minutes. You'd rather cut some of the information out than try and make up stuff on the spot. Okay, here's the fun part. What happens when the game goes live? So we've got our two casters, the play-by-play and the color caster. And the play-by-play is probably the one that people think that they can do the best or the most easily, but actually end up stumbling over themselves. Slow down. Really focus on quality of your words instead of quantity. It is your job to concisely cover the action, and not just stating what's happening moment to moment. You can't say, okay, this person is dead, this person is dead, this person is dead, this person is dead. We can all see the scoreboard. We can all see who's killing who. That's not the important aspect. Try and phrase a story as to what you're watching right now and why things are happening, what things are going to happen. How is the dynamic of that engagement changing? And this goes for any game. This doesn't matter whether you're talking about Rocket League or Overwatch, a shooting game, a fighting game. But you got to be focused on how is the fight changing moment to moment. So some of the things that I look at is key abilities. Now, this doesn't go for Rocket League. In Rocket League in general, we're going to be focusing more on the balance, the tempo, the hype. But for something like Dota, Overwatch, Valorant, key abilities or resources. So did someone use their ultimate at the wrong time too early into a fight? Is someone dead without the ultimate? Did they die, but they still managed to get their ultimate off or their abilities off? That's the sort of thing that you're going to be focusing on. Stuff like roles is very closely related to that. Was someone an initiator and all their job was to go inside, dump everything that they've got, and then soak up everything from the opposing team? Did the person fulfill their role beforehand, and therefore are they going to make a longer impact in the fight? I mean, this is probably the hardest part about casting to get right. Is what do I need to focus on at every stage, and what is still yet to come in the fight that could change it around? And that's when you're focusing on your balance and your tempo after that moment onwards. It might look like things are calming down at this stage, but it's actually just that calm before the storm, before the counter gets thrown at the other team. A lot of people get their hype wrong because of this. They see a lot of buttons being pressed and they think that the moment is right now, but the other team is still very much in control of what they're doing. They evade everything. In Rocket League, this comes up a lot where I see a shot go on and everyone hypes up the first shot and then they go, oh, but it was saved, and then everything dies down. And they don't realize that that was just the first parry of a very long engagement where that was just one person taking an attempt. And yeah, you can get a little bit hyped up for that, but don't forget about what comes in the next 20 seconds. This is why I started this by saying, look at the context of everything. What came before this moment, what is happening right now, and what is still yet to come in this engagement. Don't hype everything. Not everything has to be poggers, guys. There are key moments in every fight, and you've got to pick those up to be a good play-by-play. Not everyone is poggers all the time, right? And sometimes there are matches where nothing is poggers. There are matches that are terrible quality. The important thing is, don't say that they're terrible quality. It's a bad thing to do to put people down. You've always got to be focusing on the best things that are happening, what people are learning from, how things are improving throughout a match. Colorcasters, you are there to really give understanding to people who are watching, give your brilliant insight, even if it is absolute rubbish. Say it with conviction. Now, the big thing about this is don't try and make up things. Don't try and say stuff for the sake of saying stuff. Don't try and make predictions based on no evidence whatsoever. Certainly don't make up stuff about the players. That's going to get you in big trouble very quickly. But Otherwise, your job is just to reflect on the game as it's going on. So you're going to try and, after the engagement, break down where the key point was. Maybe the play-by-play was just busy covering the action and didn't see something on the side, and you can be like, right, this moment, this ability, this pick here was the real big moment that everything changed around and there was a flip, or this is where they secured it at the beginning of the fight. Ever since this moment, the fight was decided or the goal was already secured. That's your job. You're also trying to figure out what teams are doing right consistently, doing wrong consistently, what they're being able to adapt to, and you don't have to be right. Just don't be mean about it. That's it. It really is that easy. And then what you're going to be doing is you also got to figure out, is there something wrong with the way a team is thinking, or their drafting, or their hero choices, or their character choices, or is it the way that they're putting the pieces together? Maybe they've got the perfect on-paper lineup, but when they go into the game, they're not executing it. Maybe just because they were discoordinated, or they actually don't know what their role is in a fight. What is everyone doing that they should be doing, and what are they trying to do that they shouldn't be doing? How can a team adjust so that they get better going forwards? And how can they use their current skill? Don't just be like, get better. That's not constructive criticism. That's just insulting. And then what you can do is, if you get really good at this, you can start figuring out what's going to happen next. Or in fact, it's not just when you get really good. This is kind of the things you should be looking for, especially in ability games. So stuff like Valorant, stuff like Overwatch. And when one team has a very definite advantage over the other one, you should be able to call that out. You should be talking about what sort of combos you can come out with on that. You should be talking about how many ultimates do you want to use in this next fight. In Overwatch, where you don't just get the thing back after 30 seconds, you really don't want to be wasting 5 ultimates into a game. Whereas when you're playing something like Dota, if it's a very short cooldown ultimate, it doesn't matter. Person should be going into it with that, and how are they going to engage with it? How does a team come back? Should they, in Dota or MOBA, be looking to maybe take a little bit more time and farm, or should they be trying to engage a little bit more because their ideas are right, and now the opponents, having dumped all their resources, are in a weak spot? Overwatch as well. If one team has wasted all their resources, now is the time for the other team to try and capitalize on that resource advantage. And that's the sort of predictions you got to be making going into the next fight. This is what I want to see. These are the positions. I'm interested in the pathing of this team to try and avoid this danger that the other team presents. Stuff like that. This is a big one. Knowing when to talk, and more importantly, when not to talk, is the most important aspect, especially with a caster that you've never worked with before. And they all work pretty much on the same understanding. You say something, you finish saying something quite clearly, and then you keep quiet. Don't try and tack on something else that you've thought at the end of your sentence. Don't say something, pause for 2 seconds, and then try and carry on, because you are going to throw your co-caster off, and it's 100% your fault at that stage. Some people like to, or don't mind it if you react to something with just a, oh wow, especially, a color caster will be like, damn, that was good. That's just adding to the hype of the moment. For something like Rocket League especially, you don't have a designated line between who is talking the play-by-play and the color, and so you need to be careful not to talk for 4.5 minutes of a 5-minute game. You got to say 1 or 2 key points and then stop talking. You can maybe catch from your co-caster, comment on what they said. Once you've said maybe a minute's worth of stuff, you keep quiet and you let your co-caster go. When your co-caster says something, don't just ignore them. Don't just carry on with your own thought that you've been thinking about while they were talking. It's a conversation between the two of you, and the more you can build off each other, the better it's going to be. And don't be afraid to disagree with them either. If they're saying something and you're like, actually, I understand it like this, or I believe this team is doing this thing well, bring it up. It adds a nice dynamic, and it actually means the audience has something more to watch. Play-by-play, when you're going to be starting is as the fight commences, and when you stop talking is basically when the fight is decided. It doesn't have to be when the last person dies. It just needs to be when the fight is really decided. Sometimes fights drag on for an extended period of time, and you've been talking for 4 minutes straight, and you literally carry on going. That's okay. Most color casters can pick up at some stage and just give some hype towards it, or just comment on how crazy it is. That's okay. Again, rather just slow down and get your words to mean something, rather than get yourself into a wild spin just trying to make up words for the sake of filling dead air. For color casters, you really want to start when your play-by-play ends the fight, kind of figure out what the key moments were. And then there's a very careful balance because you need to stop before the next engagement starts. So typically we say that if there is just a poking battle, you're free to carry on going for a while. It doesn't just have to be when there's a possibility of a fight starting, but as soon as the fight starts, you should be ending it. So a good rule of thumb for most of those is if two players you can see are getting close together in something like Valorant or Counter-Strike, or two teams are starting to come together in Fortnite or Apex, if in Overwatch there's two people that are just kind of like eyeing each other out across the battlefield, that's fine. After the first pick happens though, or the first shots start being traded, that's when you really want to hand it off back to your play-by-play, especially when the first ability comes out. Color casters also need to get that balance right in that interim, because what they need to do is they need to summarize the previous fight, talk about the current state of things and what we're expecting into the next fight. So it can be very dangerous to get caught in over-analyzing the previous fight and then not have said anything about the next event when there's so much information waiting for you. Again, it's the 3 points: looking back, looking now, looking forwards. You kind of eventually settle into either play-by-play or color. It's really good to be able to swap between the two of them because it makes you available for more gigs. But typically people will fall into one category or the other and then start refining that a little bit more. I would say you could start doing that after a year or two in casting, but definitely try out both to start with. And then as for styles, everyone has their own style. You should not be trying to mimic someone else's. You can be inspired by it, but you shouldn't be trying to mimic it. Okay, you've done all the screaming, all the hype has happened, all the chaos has come to a close, and you need to wrap it up now. And remember, there's two ways this is going to go. Either you're going to be going to a break or you're going to be rounding off the broadcast. And so you just really want to summarize all the key things that happened in that game overall. You can go and reminisce on your key moments. You can say this was really good, this was a very close competition, or even just start talking about if it was a one-sided competition, what does this mean? This team needs to go practice more. This was an unexpected result. This was an expected result where this team has a lot of experience behind them. All of these sort of aspects are very important to just be like, this is what happened in general, and this is the takeaway that we can remember going forwards. And then obviously you want to congratulate the teams. Don't just congratulate one team, that's mean. Even if there was a complete one-sided stomp, give something to the people who lost. Maybe this is a team that's really starting to improve. Sometimes you do see, especially in the early brackets, where you've got the first seed going up against the 16th seed, and there's just unfortunately no chance of an upset happening at that stage. And you can talk about what they've learned or how they can take this as motivation to get to the future. Depending on whether we're going to a break or whether we're going to the end, if we're going to a break, you really want to mention what the next fixtures are going to be. Typically, your post game is going to be a lot shorter than if you're going to finish this. So wrap up this, talk about your key points, congratulate the teams. After the break, we're going to be heading off to Limitless versus French Class. We'll be back right after this. And that right after this should be nice and clean. Just like that, that's giving you an indication, not to the audience, but to your production, that you are wanting to go to a break. If you're doing it at the end, for the love of all things gaming, thank your production. This is not about you as a caster. There are a lot of people behind the scenes working to try and make this happen. You have had a production person who's doing far more work than you are. That is a lot of work, and they don't get enough credits. Everyone sees your face, but they don't see the work that's going on in the background, and you would look terrible if it wasn't for production. So make sure to thank them. That is one of the most important things that I can emphasize, and a habit that I think everyone should get into. You want to try and give some socials for the tournament, for the organizers, for production, for yourself as casters, for the teams. Just give some socials out, right? Get yourself a following. People might have enjoyed you. They might want to know who you are in the future. And so take the moment to hype up you guys as a crew. You've done your job. Well done. And then you head off to the exit really nicely. One of the big things that I see people getting wrong is they try and vamp for a little bit too long just because they've agreed beforehand that the play-by-play caster is going to throw to a break. You don't need to. You don't need to try and find a way to hand back to your co-caster so that they can throw to a break. Anyone can go to a break, and that's absolutely fine. Especially at the end of a production, it's a nice way to go. Any final thoughts to your co-caster, because they might be sitting on something that they're trying to fit into a conversation. Any final thoughts? and then they can say it, they'll hand it back to you, and you go, well, that's it. Thank you very much, everyone. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll see you next week when this tournament continues. Have a great evening. And that's it. Okay, here's some of the more important information for the people trying to get into it, people trying to make a name for themselves. You've never actually started with casting and you want to know how to get into it or what to do to get better. First and foremost, build your vocabulary. It's really important that you don't just say everything was great. Everything was great. That was a great shot. That was a great pass. Really great shot. This guy's hitting some great headshots. If you say the word great constantly, it's going to sound annoying eventually to your audience, even to your co-caster, even to yourself. I'm not saying go read the dictionary, but read something. Just maybe even go watch other casters and see what turns of phrases that they start to incorporate into theirs. You want to review your work. Go back and sit and watch your casts, because you will find that there are certain things that you do constantly that annoy you. Another thing you can do to improve is get a better setup. I'm not saying that everyone should go and get the most expensive stuff that they can, but slowly you can start putting money that you earned from casting back into it. I bought myself a decent mic, I bought myself some lighting, I bought myself a new webcam. With all the profits that I made or all the fees that I charged from casting, just because I want to keep that growth going. So yeah, it's not easy to slowly build up that setup, but you don't need everything all at once. Start playing with lighting. Go on YouTube, find out some YouTube videos about how I can make my lighting better. Start playing around with the idea of a green screen or something like that. These are the sort of things that you can slowly build up over years and years and years, right? And then of course, you should practice. It is so important to get practice. It doesn't come naturally, ever. Right, so how do you find gigs? Most important thing, networking. Get on your social medias, message other people, apply to companies, contact companies. You're going to want to tune into streams so that you know what these sort of things are like. Start making connections with current broadcasters, current casters, and then say, how can I get involved with this? So networking is incredibly important to be able to build your reach, to build your reputation, and to become known for what you're doing. And then probably the most important thing for getting a job is getting yourself a show reel. This is what you're going to use when applying. So if you see a call for casters out there, they're going to ask you to send in a show reel. A show reel is a 1 to 2 minute long clip or series of clips, compilation of some of your best moments. It's your CV, it's your portfolio, all in 1 or 2 minutes. Having a show reel is the most important tool you can have to get further engagement. And then you got to know where to look. Broadcast.gg is a Discord server. At Broadcast.gg, you can go on there and start looking for jobs. They've got entry-level paid, they've got unpaid, they've got pro paid. But the pro paid, they will expect you to have some sort of experience behind you and some sort of a CV. The entry level starts at like $10 an hour, and then you can work from there and start getting a little bit more. You can get involved with other Discord servers, other production companies, so you can apply to be a caster on one of those, and then they'll put out announcements whenever there's a gig available for you. So certainly getting in touch is really good. One of the things that people don't teach you is knowing your worth, and it's taken me 6 years to figure this one out. You got to understand what you can offer, what experience you've got, and how valuable your time is. I've got my set rates. There is no actual set rate, but typically for starting out, you're looking at about $10 an hour. For more advanced casters, you're looking at $20 to $25 per hour, maybe more. There's a weird balance where you've got to go, how much do I want to do this gig versus how much is my time worth? Something like RLCS, you get a lot of prestige for that. I've got a Liquipedia page now because I've done RLCS broadcasts. And that sort of thing is more valuable than 250 Rand for a day's work or something like that. And so it becomes a very personal conversation. Obviously, if you're brand new to casting, you can't expect to be paid, or at least not regularly. If you do get paid, you are very lucky and you should be very grateful for that. But having that humility to go, I need to put in the hard work so that I can get better, means that you've got to do a lot of hours of unpaid work to do this. You wouldn't go and ask someone to paint you a painting and they've never painted something before and then charge you 200,000 Rand. It doesn't work like that. You've got to have something that you can give. And so doing little private scrims, doing little personal tournaments are very important. It's that sort of balancing act that you've got to do. And that's a very personal thing. Understand you're not going to get rich. understand that there's very little money actually here in the SA scene for casters. There's very few sponsors getting involved, and so very few companies have the capabilities to offer you money. Certainly not in the individual teams, typically. For this, are you trying to make this a more full-time thing? Unfortunately, in South Africa, it is not possible to make it as a full-time caster yet. That's blatant right here, right now. Overseas, it's still very difficult to make it as a caster, and you've certainly got to have the experience, but you can start gaining international experience, start making a name for yourself before you try and travel overseas. Don't move to the US and then think you're going to be a caster from day one. You've really got to start getting your name out there and getting the experience before you can start doing this. And so I would certainly say that finding any gigs at the beginning is most important, and then you can be a little bit more selective about your gigs. The final thing, just a couple of extra things that I couldn't fit into any of the topics, but I do think it's worth knowing, is don't eat or drink on camera. You don't want to be munching on things, especially crunchy chips in the background. We can hear it through the mic. Don't eat or drink on camera. And it should be said that obviously don't smoke on camera. That is highly inappropriate. But eating or drinking on camera is not acceptable. If you are finding that your voice is getting a bit sore and you've been talking for a while and you're on camera, it's perfectly fine to have a glass of water or a bottle of water next to you, take a quick sip, and then carry on with it. No one's going to be offended by that. But don't be chewing while you're trying to talk. But especially when the camera's on, you can survive for 5 minutes without eating or drinking. Warming up. Especially if you're new to casting, if you don't talk for a long time, you want to do some warm-ups. You want to just get your voice ready, mute your mic, just start doing vocal exercises. There's a bunch of them online that you can go and look up. Some nice little tongue twisters to get everything flowing and enunciate properly. But make sure that you're not straining your voice, especially if you have a long cast ahead of you. If you're starting out especially, I do not suggest that you try and produce and cast at the same time, or solo cast at the beginning. It is very difficult to solo cast. It's very difficult to produce and cast because you're so busy distracted by buttons, you're not actually giving your attention to the match at hand. And then you got to get out there. You got to start doing it. You have got to be able to take that leap. You are going to get it wrong. You are going to make mistakes. It's going to suck. It doesn't matter. Just start doing it. It's so much fun when you get into it. There's so much less pressure than playing. I can promise you that right now. That's why I moved into casting, is you don't have to train the 6 hours a week. You can just rock up on the day and have some fun, enjoy the hype, and lose your goddamn mind when things go wrong. It's great. It's so much fun. And I think the thing that I missed on here, that is the most important thing, is be sincere. You've got to be sincere. People can tell when you're putting it on. They can tell when you're making stuff up. They can tell when you're nervous. It doesn't matter. Smile, laugh, joke about things. I started for a long time trying to be too professional, and it just doesn't make sense. It doesn't come across well. It's not needed. Just smile, laugh. Don't sit staring at the camera with a weird smile on your face constantly. Looks creepy. Just be yourself on camera, relax, have fun, and enjoy it. So, I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I've certainly had fun putting this together. It was nice to put all my thoughts down there. But if you have any questions, there's all my social medias. I'm even on Threads now. I'm one of the cool kids. So, hit me up. I stream once a week on Twitch. I've got a bunch of YouTube videos going up constantly. Or I've got a slightly more personal Instagram page that you guys can go check out. But I really hope that this helped a lot of people, and hope to do more of these. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the pitch.
Who's the greatest player of the best head games? He's a sports commentator, he's all tourism. Follow him over Twitch for the best over watching other games, such with all tourism.